If you've ever tried to understand how the European Union works, you've probably encountered a peculiar problem. Two institutions with almost identical names, both called Council, both based in Brussels, both involving the same countries. The European Council and the Council of the European Union. Even seasoned political observers sometimes mix them up. But here's the thing, confusing these two bodies is like confusing a company's board of directors with its management team. They have fundamentally different roles, different members, and different powers. And understanding this distinction is essential to grasping how decisions affecting 450 million Europeans are actually made. So why does this confusion exist? The answer lies in how the European Union evolved. The EU wasn't designed from scratch with a neat organizational chart. Instead, it grew organically over decades, with new institutions added as integration deepened. The Council of the European Union, often called the Council of Ministers, is one of the original institutions, dating back to the 1950s, when 6 countries formed the European Coal and Steel Community. It was the body where national ministers would meet to make decisions together. Then, in the 1970s, European leaders started holding informal summit meetings to discuss big-picture strategy. These gatherings eventually became formalized as the European Council in 1974, and it only gained official institutional status with the Lisbon Treaty in 2009. So we ended up with 2 councils, born from different needs at different times, with names that sound almost interchangeable, but functions that are anything but. Let's start with the European Council, because it's the easier one to understand. Think of it as the EU's Strategic Steering Committee. The European Council brings together the heads of state or government from all 27 member countries. That's presidents and prime ministers. Emmanuel Macron from France, Olaf Scholz from Germany, Giorgia Meloni from Italy, and so on. They meet at least 4 times a year in Brussels, usually for 2-day summits where they hash out the EU's overall direction and priorities. The President of the European Commission, currently Ursula von der Leyen, also participates, along with the High Representative for Foreign Affairs. And crucially, the European Council has its own full-time president, who chairs these meetings and represents the EU internationally at the highest level. Since December 2024, that's been António Costa, the former Portuguese Prime Minister who succeeded Charles Michel. What does the European Council actually do? It doesn't write laws, instead it sets the agenda. When Europe faces a major crisis, a financial meltdown, a migration surge, a war on its borders, the European Council is where leaders meet to define the response. They decide whether the EU should pursue a new policy direction, whether to open membership negotiations with candidate countries, who should lead EU institutions, and what the Union's strategic priorities should be for the coming years. In June 2024, for example, the European Council adopted a new strategic agenda for 2024 to 2029, outlining priorities like strengthening European competitiveness, bolstering defense capabilities, and managing migration. These aren't detailed policy proposals, they're the broad directions that the rest of the EU machinery will then work to implement. The European Council operates almost entirely by consensus. Legally, most decisions require unanimity, which means any single leader can block a decision. This makes European Council summits intense affairs, often running late into the night as leaders negotiate compromises. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The Council of the European Union, let's call it the Council of Ministers to avoid confusion, is something completely different. While the European Council is about strategy and direction, the Council of Ministers is about legislation and governance. This is where the EU's actual laws are negotiated and adopted. But instead of heads of government meeting a few times a year, the Council of Ministers involves national ministers meeting constantly in different configurations depending on the topic. When agriculture policy is being discussed, the agriculture ministers from all 27 countries meet. When it's foreign affairs, the foreign ministers gather. When it's economic policy, the finance ministers convene. There are 10 different configurations in total, from the Foreign Affairs Council to the Transport Council to the Environment Council. These ministerial meetings happen throughout the year, roughly 100 sessions annually. And this is where the EU's legislative work actually happens. The Council of Ministers shares legislative power with the European Parliament through what's called the ordinary legislative procedure. The European Commission proposes a law, the Parliament debates and amends it, the Council of Ministers negotiates its position, and then the two institutions work together to reach a final text. Without the Council of Ministers approving, no EU law can pass. This makes it one of the most powerful legislative bodies in the world, yet most Europeans couldn't tell you what it does or who represents their country in it. The Council of Ministers also has a rotating presidency, which adds another layer of complexity. Every 6 months, a different member state takes the helm, chairing meetings and setting priorities for that period. Hungary held the presidency in the second half of 2024, followed by Poland starting January 1st, 2025. Denmark will take over in July 2025. This rotation is meant to ensure equality among member states and prevent any single country from dominating. But it also means the Council's priorities and style can shift noticeably every 6 months. A country holding the presidency can't force through its own agenda. It's supposed to act as an honest broker. But it can certainly emphasize certain issues and shape the pace of negotiations. So let's crystallize the distinction. The European Council is 27 leaders meeting quarterly to set strategic direction, chaired by a full-time president, making decisions by consensus that guide the EU's overall path. The Council of Ministers is hundreds of ministerial meetings each year across different policy areas, with a rotating presidency every 6 months, sharing legislative power with Parliament to actually create EU law. One is the compass, the other is the engine. One decides where to go, the other determines how to get there. Why does this matter beyond bureaucratic trivia? Because understanding this distinction reveals how power actually flows in the European Union. When you hear that the Council blocked a proposal, you need to know which Council. If the European Council couldn't reach consensus, it means the leaders themselves are divided on fundamental strategy. That's a political deadlock at the highest level. If the Council of Ministers rejected something, it means the technical negotiations between ministries broke down, or that a qualified majority couldn't be reached on a specific law. These are very different kinds of obstacles requiring different solutions. Consider a concrete example: EU enlargement. When Ukraine applied for EU membership after Russia's invasion in 2022, it was the European Council that granted Ukraine candidate status in June of that year. That was a strategic political decision made by the 27 leaders. But the actual process of negotiating Ukraine's accession, the detailed work of aligning thousands of pages of legislation, assessing compliance with EU standards, negotiating transition periods, that happens through the Council of Ministers, with ministers from different sectors evaluating Ukraine's progress in their respective areas. The European Council provides the political green light and monitors overall progress. The Council of Ministers does the granular work of making enlargement happen. Or take foreign policy. The European Council defines the EU's strategic approach to major international challenges. In late 2024, for instance, European Council meetings addressed the EU's stance on conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, relations with China, and transatlantic ties. But the actual foreign policy decisions, imposing sanctions, deploying missions, negotiating agreements, those are handled by the Foreign Affairs Council, one of the configurations of the Council of Ministers. The foreign ministers meet monthly to implement the strategic vision their bosses defined at the European Council level. There's also a practical reason this confusion persists. Both institutions share the same building. The Europa building in Brussels, with its distinctive lantern-shaped structure, houses both the European Council and the Council of Ministers. They share administrative support from the General Secretariat of the Council, a body of about 3,000 officials who prepare meetings, draft documents, and ensure continuity. So when you see news footage of leaders arriving for a summit, and then weeks later see ministers entering the same building, it's easy to assume it's all the same thing. But the meetings happening inside serve entirely different purposes. The relationship between these two councils also reflects a fundamental tension in European integration, the balance between intergovernmentalism and supranationalism. The European Council is purely intergovernmental. It's national leaders making decisions together, each representing their country's interests. There's no supranational element, it's sovereign states cooperating. The Council of Ministers sits somewhere in between. Ministers represent their national governments, but they're also part of an EU legislative process, working with the supranational European Parliament and implementing proposals from the supranational Commission. And many Council decisions now require only a qualified majority, 55% of member states representing 65% of the EU population, rather than unanimity. This means individual countries can be outvoted, a significant transfer of sovereignty that doesn't exist in the European Council. Looking at the current leadership illustrates these differences perfectly. António Costa, as President of the European Council, is essentially a facilitator and representative. He chairs summit meetings, works behind the scenes to build consensus among the 27 leaders, and represents the European Council externally. But he doesn't have executive power. He can't propose legislation or make decisions unilaterally. His influence comes from his ability to broker agreements and maintain trust among leaders with very different political perspectives and national interests. Meanwhile, the rotating presidency of the Council of Ministers gives a member state significant organizational power for 6 months. Poland, holding the presidency in early 2025, sets the agenda for ministerial meetings, decides which issues to prioritize, and shapes the pace of legislative negotiations. It's a different kind of influence, more administrative and procedural, but crucial for determining what actually gets done. The confusion between these two councils isn't just a European problem. International partners sometimes struggle with it too. When a foreign leader wants to engage with the EU, who do they call? If it's about strategic partnership or a major political issue, they might seek a meeting with the European Council President. If it's about negotiating a specific agreement or policy, they'd work with the relevant configuration of the Council of Ministers, possibly coordinating with whichever country holds the rotating presidency. This multiplicity of voices, sometimes called the EU's phone number problem, can make the Union seem fragmented or confusing to outsiders. Yet this complexity also reflects the EU's unique nature. It's not a federal state with a clear hierarchy, nor is it just an international organization where countries meet occasionally. It's a hybrid system where strategic political leadership from national capitals coexists with shared legislative processes and supranational institutions. The European Council embodies the former. The Council of Ministers bridges both worlds. Understanding this helps explain why EU decision-making can seem slow and cumbersome. It requires alignment at multiple levels, from the strategic vision of leaders to the technical negotiations of ministers to the democratic input of the directly elected parliament. As the EU faces mounting challenges in 2025 and beyond, from geopolitical tensions and economic competition to climate change and technological disruption, both councils will play critical roles. The European Council will need to forge consensus on how Europe positions itself in an increasingly multipolar world, whether to deepen integration in areas like defense and how to balance enlargement with institutional reform. The Council of Ministers will need to translate these strategic choices into concrete legislation, from regulations on artificial intelligence to directives on energy security to decisions on trade policy. Neither can function effectively without the other, yet their distinct roles remain essential. So the next time you hear about the Council making a decision in Brussels, take a moment to ask, which one? Is it the leaders setting the course or the ministers doing the detailed work? Is it António Costa facilitating a consensus among presidents and prime ministers or Polish ministers chairing negotiations on specific laws? That distinction might seem like bureaucratic minutiae, but it's actually the key to understanding how power works in an institution that shapes the lives of nearly 500 million people. The European Union's complexity isn't a bug. It's a feature designed to balance national sovereignty with collective action, strategic vision with democratic process, and the interests of 27 different countries with the needs of a continent. I hope this clarifies a confusion that even many Europeans share. If you want to continue exploring how the EU really works and dive deeper into the institutions that shape our world, subscribe to this channel for more accessible geopolitical analysis. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss future videos, and let me know in the comments what other aspects of European politics you'd like to understand better. Thank you for learning with me today.